I always think that my imagination is pretty big and broad, and usually if it's something that would wow me, most people like that's just on another level from what they would think about, right? I've never been afraid of competition. For one, a rising tide lifts all ships. So, back to the bar days, like I used to go to all my competitors and be like, hey, I'm going to organize an event. I'm going to bring 300 people through everybody's bars on buses. And they're like, why would you bring us business? It's like, well, because if we can create an entire scene here, it's helping everybody, right?
Wins.
Because these aren't permanently affixed to the ground, because they're portable. You don't need any building permits to assemble them.
Yeah.
And so that meant we went from, a greenfield site to a cash flowing asset in 90 days.
So if you're an entrepreneur or a real estate investor that likes looking around corners, understanding where the next opportunities are coming, in this episode of Prime People, I have a very special guest for you. So I met Max Picton over a year ago now, December 2024. And my network brings me into proximity to people that are usually working on cutting edge things. Max is actually working on a solution for storage facilities that we are helping him roll out across Southwestern Ontario. But I want him to dig into like where the inception came up with, where does he see the opportunity in the industry? But before we get into all of that, Max, you have a pretty interesting background. You're in BC. Instead of me going on and on, why don't you explain a little bit about who Max Picton is, and then we'll get into the storage stuff.
For sure. Yeah, no, appreciate the introduction, and great to be on here. So yeah, as far as my background, it's not in real estate. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. So I started early in my career, in my 20s. I had an entertainment company doing golf tournaments and pub crawls and, kind of stuff that 20-year-olds are into back in those days. And from there, I moved into club promotions and had a knack for that. I walked into a club and within 2 months increased their sales by 6 figures. So had something figured out there. Came back the next year. I was like, okay, well, now I know my value, and let's come with a more aggressive contract. And the owner kind of hummed and hawed about it, and that's a lot of money. And while he was going back and forth trying to grind us down the price, the opportunity came up to actually take over one of the other nightclubs in town. And so found a partner, put together a quick business plan, raised some capital, and went out, and we took over the second largest nightclub in BC. And so that was my introduction to a real business, so to speak. And that was quite the adventure. Started in, didn't even have enough money when we opened the doors to make payroll for the first 2 weeks. We're like, okay, this has to work. And we ended up, doing almost $1 million in our first 3 months. Like, it was just insane. We had lineups around the block, and we like to do things with a splash, right? And so, sure. We literally opening day, we had red carpets laid out, LED light towers, and this is back before those things were common, and booked limos. Everybody in town got limo rides into the club and just made a splash, right? And we had a lot of fun back in those days.
What years was that, like, roughly?
Oh geez, that would have been 2009 or 10, somewhere around there. Yeah, so I was 27 years old at the time.
That's unreal. And I think there's a lot of people watching this, whether you're a real estate or entrepreneur, that actually come from hospitality. So people watching or listening, if you're new to this show, I was in hospitality as well. So I ran a company called Is This Anyway to run a restaurant. I did marketing for Mike Smith, but I started off as a bouncer. Then I was a barback. Then I was a bartender. Then I was a DJ. Then I was a manager. And I kind of worked my way up. And what I think is super interesting about that, Max, is there are people that I've met throughout the years that realized, it is one of those industries where you become very dynamic, right? You have to learn how to talk to people. So
it's a people industry. Yeah,
100%. And then you got to deal with conflict. And then what you said reminded me of a story at Pizza Pie where we had this one restaurant. Mike was like, listen, I love this place. The food's good, but we're struggling for sales. And like, we were running out in traffic, handing out pizza to get people in, and it worked. That looking around corners piece when you were there doing things like the LED lights and the limos, where did that spark come from for some of these ideas? And like, where did the risk piece come in where you were like, you know what, let's just try this and see if it works?
I don't really try and emulate the way other people do things. I always think that my imagination is pretty big and broad. And usually if it's something that would wow me, most people like, that's just on another level from what they would think about. Right. And so, like even back to when I had the promotion company, like shooter girls walking around, handing out shots at the start of the pub crawl. Well, they weren't just walking around with a tray of shots. They were walking around with squirt guns full of booze and actually shooting, fun over the top kind of things like that. And, part of it probably growing up in Penticton back in the 80s. I mean, that was, if you know anything about BC, that was the party capital back then. We had 3 of the 4 largest nightclubs in the province in this little town of 35,000 people. And, I remember one year literally watching there's one set of traffic lights coming into town at the bottom of Child Parkway, and it turned red and green 8 times before one car was able to drive through, because it was gridlocked traffic all the way through town, all the way to the next town on the north and all the way to the other town on the south. And people just started parking their vehicles and walking into town. And so it was just this amazing atmosphere. And, growing up by a kid, you're influenced by what's around you. My family ran a campground and a motel in those early years. And so, here I am, a kid running around. I was an early entrepreneur. I, August long weekend, the partiers would all be there, be running around the campground, collecting empties. I'd be making, $400 or $500 on a long weekend, just collecting empties, right?
For a kid. Yeah.
Oh yeah. 10 years old and making bank. So
watching your parents too, did you watch your parents like do business, and did you see kind of the struggles of entrepreneurs as well as, the upside?
They were more in management. My mom actually got into real estate. She was an agent for, I think, around 10 years. But my father actually worked in the bush, and he ran chainsaw for a living, and then actually became a winemaker. So he was a winemaker for Cedar Creek Vineyards, and then, co-winemaker at Cedar Creek, and then became the head winemaker at Incomeep Cellars after that. And so he was more of that side, and the motel and the campground were just kind of opportunities that arose, and it allowed my mom to stay at home with the kids. There's 4 of us. And so, she could kind of run the business while we were running around terrorizing the grounds, and had big 17-acre playground as a kid growing up, which was pretty awesome.
Well, that's going to go to actually what we're going to talk about when it comes to the investment side and the real estate side with storage facilities and how that landscape is changing. But let me step back for a second.
Sure.
As you're talking about Penticton and that area and that generation, I mean, London, when I came here in the early 2000s, was the exact same. Like, we would have lineups down the block past Prince Albert. The streets would be shut down at nighttime. The drinking and party culture was a huge thing. And it's interesting because I look at today, and a lot of my friends back then that drank and did all the things are now running sober coffee parties. And like, now the health culture has really turned around, where people are doing more sauna and cold plunge than they're doing that. And the people in those industries are having to adapt and create event spaces, and things have changed dramatically because people are conscious of that. How do you think that translates to how you got into storage? Because I think there's a direct link between those two things.
I mean, I don't know how direct of a link. It's just, again, I walk into an industry and I don't have a preconceived notion of how things are done. I've just kind of got my own ideas on how things can function. And that's kind of how it started with storage. I didn't know or understand how things were typically run. And I just looked at it for, what's going to work for me and what do I think would be exciting. Or, in the case of storage, it was actually risk mitigation. It was just, looking at ways of not exposing myself more than anything. But yeah, so I don't know if there's.
What do you mean by the risk mitigation piece?
Well, okay, so fast forward, had the bars, went from the nightclub to a sports bar, and then had both of those running for a bit, and just got to the point where I was tired of dealing with the drunks.
Sure.
And so, I was looking for the next opportunity, and I'll take a step right back. We're going to go back into this story. I'll get back to storage in a minute here. Just going to tell you how I got there. But yeah, so I ended up, one of my regulars, who ended up becoming a mentor of mine. He's a fellow named Gord Lindsay, and he is probably one of the wealthiest men in all of Canada. He built a company called North America Construction, founded it, built it up to the 4th largest construction company in Canada. So, for example, he built the water treatment facility for the city of Toronto. He built the nuclear submarine jetty off the coast of Canada. Like, we're talking major Canadian infrastructure type construction development projects, right? And so fantastic person to learn from, and learned a ton working with him for a number of years. But he called me up one day and he's like, Max, he's like, I like you. I like your vision for Penticton. He's like, I want to invest. What are we going to build? Let's go build something. I went, well, this is incredible, right? And so, I wasn't really prepared. I was like, give me 2 weeks. I'll come back to you with a proposal. And in the back of my mind, I'd had this idea that I wanted to do. It was for a beach resort, and this beach resort was predicated on I'd stayed once upon a time in a yurt, and it was like a luxury yurt, with full amenities, bathrooms, and just done out really, really cool. And I just had this vision in my head. And I'm like, called him up. I'm like, Gord, we're going to build a beach resort. beach resort. He's like, all right. Yeah. He's like, I got one piece of property. He's like, if you can secure that piece of land, then I'll invest in you. I said, all right. And so it was this rundown old campground. It's called Happy Hour Campground. I was actually on native land at the time. And so, I'm going, okay, well, I got to figure out who's the landowner and go and see if we can get this deal done. And ended up reaching out to a friend of mine who was I want to say it was the land resources officer for the Penticton Indian Band. And so I reached out to him. Hey, can I get a meeting? Sat down. I'm like, hey, so there's this piece of land, I want to get in. I want to clean it up. I got this big vision. And he goes, you want to get in there and clean it up? It's our land. Let's talk. Oh, what are the chances, right? So, one thing led to another, and we ended up doing that deal and went in there and cleaned this site up and built this beautiful beach resort. So 11-acre property, yurts all on it. We had restaurant, coffee shop, ice cream, CrossFit gym, built a beach stage, brought some of the
what's it
the
called?
old nightclub stuff, Barefoot Beach Resort.
Look at this. That's unreal. Are these what you guys built? That's
my that was my resort.
Cool. That's unbelievable. That is so cool. What a cool concept. And RVs as well too.
Yeah, RVs in the back half. So it was yurts kind of right along the front. So that kind of attracted everybody in. We had at the time there was like 11 rental yurts, and it was amazing. It was such a fun project to be in front of. And, like for me, it was, like I said, I grew up in the 80s in Penticton when it was the happening hotspot and everybody wanted to be there. And it was just this amazing place to be. And then time started changing. The scene changed, as we talked about. And, it just, all of it changed. It started to die off a little bit. And campgrounds were, they were disappearing. And so it was making it difficult for families to come and experience it all. And so just said, I want to do my part to really try and keep Penticton alive and my childhood memories happening for the next generation. And so, that was sort of the entrance to the southern entrance to Penticton. And it was like the first thing you saw when you came driving in, and it used to be a bit of an eyesore. And so we were able to take that and turn it into something beautiful and an amazing amenity for the city. And it was fantastic. And so, while I was doing that, that actually ended up leading to, the Tourism Association was there was a long-standing legal battle between them and the Penticton Hospitality Association, and they were fighting. I think it had been going on for almost 5 years, where they were battling over funding that came in through the hotel taxes, and it culminated in the chair, the vice chair, and the executive director all kind of leaving the organization at the same time, and so they were floundering a little bit, and I got a call like, hey, would you consider coming in and looking at the chairman role? And I'd never done anything like that, but again, I wanted to give back to the community, and I was involved in tourism, so I thought, okay, this is the time. So came in and stepped in, and we had a great team. The remaining people there were great, and we ended up restructuring the organization, getting it back on its feet, and kind of right when we got that sort of stabilized again, it turned into municipal election time, and had a bunch of people ask if I'd put my name forward for that. And so, chatted with the family and decided that I'd do that. So that led into 4 years of municipal government for Penticton as well as a city councillor there. So had that all going at the same time I was doing the resort. One thing I'll tell you about the resort business, if you think the drunks are bad in the nightclubs, they're worse at a beach resort.
I could imagine. Yeah.
At least to the club, somebody gets out of hand, I can just kick them out. But
they're staying there and they're sleeping there. When they get
kicked out of the bar, then they come back to us. So it wasn't quite the escape that I thought it was going to be when I transitioned careers there. But no, that was fun. We did that. I did that for 6 years. But partway through, Gord's son and I, Ben was his name. He was the third partner at Barefoot. So I did all the design and conceptualization and planning and layouts and all that. And then Ben was the guy that built it all. I'd help Ben, but he was great on tools, and Gord was there to advise us and basically write the checks at the time. And so it worked out really well. But Ben and I had worked so well together that it ended up. He called me up one day. He's like, Max, he's like, we're good together. He's like, I trust you. If I never had to set foot in another office again, I'd be a happy guy. He's like, I want to be on the tools. I want to be on site. He's like, if you want to come in and run the office, he's like, I got this construction company. I got a few assets. Let's make this into something. So ended up joining Ben, and for the next 5 years, we had a construction company. We were doing all kinds of contracts, everything from housing foundations. It was largely concrete and excavation, but we had jobs with BC Parks or City of Penticton, all kinds of different jobs, concrete tilt ups, you name it. So yeah, did construction for a while, but I started really looking at my career, and I realized that everything I was doing was like 12 to 15 hour days, and as soon as I'd step away for a minute, you start losing money, right? Whether that's bartenders trying to rip you off on what's going into the till, or guys on a job site, if the boss isn't there, you get away with whatever. And, like it was all very hands-on and involved work. And so I started thinking, all right, well, there's got to be another way. And, started looking at what's more passive, and hey, real estate, right? So yeah, eventually that's how I came around to self-storage. So we had this yard that we used to store our dump trucks and excavators on. And I started looking at it. I'm like, well, what could I do here? How could I make some money off of this? Better use of it than just storage for these machines, right? And I came up with the idea of storage. I knew it was in demand in our area, and so started kind of mapping out, okay, how many doors could I fit on this site and whatever, and ultimately, wrote up a quick little pro forma on it, and then took it to my accountant. I'm like, am I in the ballpark? He goes, no. I'm like, oh, he goes, yeah, you're way too conservative. You need to bump your numbers up. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's fantastic. I was pretty happy with what I saw there, and you're telling me I need to go higher. That's great news. And so, yeah, I got pretty excited about that. He was familiar. He had a couple clients that had storage facilities, so he knew the numbers. He obviously doesn't share them with me, but was just like, yeah, you're under. So that was great. And so that was the encouragement I needed to move forward. But now, fast forward to the risk mitigation stuff that we kind of touched on earlier. So I had the construction background. I had the resource, my mentor, Gord, obviously we could have built anything. That wouldn't have been an issue. But I didn't know what I didn't know about the industry. And so I'm like, okay, like how can I mitigate the risk of getting the product mix wrong? Because that was my biggest concern at the time. It was like, I know the market's hungry for more units, but like, do they want 10 by 10s or do they want 10 by 20s, right? Like, what happens if I build all one size and the market wants the other size? And then, I've got this massive investment out, and now I've got inventory I can't sell. And so that was my biggest concern. And so I started looking for ways on how I could mitigate that risk. And ultimately, I ended up coming across this product from a company called Boxwell. And Boxwell produces these modular containers. And really the product I think was originally intended for infill development. So if you had a traditional brick and mortar facility and you wanted to, there was an unused parking area in the back or something, you wanted to start monetizing it, you'd order some of these containers, you'd assemble them, put them in, and bang, revenue, right? And so, I looked at this product and I went, well, is there any reason why I couldn't use this to develop an entire site, right? And, because then I could use my best estimate for the product mix. I could develop half the site and, start seeing where demand is, what people are renting. And then I could tailor the rest of the site directly to consumer demand and maximize my occupancy. Sounded like a great way to offset, any of the risk that was associated with doing the development. And so long story short, that's what I decided to do. And, I'd love to tell you I was a savant and I knew it would come with all these other benefits to it, but that just happened to get lucky there. But the number one benefit was, because these aren't permanently affixed to the ground, because they're portable, you don't need any building permits to assemble them.
Yeah.
And so that meant we went from, a greenfield site to a cash flowing asset in 90 days, which is completely unheard of. I mean, a traditional development of a self-storage facility, you're looking at 3 or 4 years kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so to be able to go cash flow in 90 days was phenomenal. There's a couple other benefits, and some of them are regional. Some of them would apply anywhere. But on this particular site, we didn't have to observe property line setbacks. We were able to build right up to the fence line. So there's a whole host of benefits that come with these modular containers. But yeah, so we ended up, I kind of anticipated, I'm like, you got to model conservatively and, not expecting anything crazy. I anticipated a year to fill up the first phase, because all my research told me it's a kind of 3 years to fill a new development and whatever. We hit 100% occupancy in 40 days. Like it was like wildfire, boom. So then that fast tracked the rest of the development, and ended up realizing that this was a great model. Particularly if you could find underserved markets, which in Canada there is a ton of underserved markets. Yeah. This was a great way to meet that demand. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got into it originally. But then, as you might have guessed, like I'm not kind of guy that can just kind of sit still, and the thought of building this facility and then just sitting behind a desk and twiddling my thumbs for 8 hours a day, waiting for people to walk through the door, kind of that would have been personal hell for me. So it was like, okay, well, at the time it was 2019 when I was first putting this all together. I'm like, there must be tools on the market to automate things and make it so I don't have to sit here, right? And it was so early on in the industry for self-storage. Like self-storage has kind of been overlooked by all the other
pretty much,
major investors and stuff. And it was kind of this forgotten asset class that was just kind of owned by mom and pops and still largely is. But so the technology hadn't advanced like it had in other industries or in other asset classes. And so I actually found a product, and it was a smart entry system, electronic locks, and I found another software that I wanted to use with call center and all this. And I actually had to start piecing together a system because there was nothing on the market that was cohesive that you could just implement into your facility, which I thought was crazy. It took me months to figure out how all the moving pieces work. I actually had to get the company to build the first APIs with the software
to talk to each other,
to actually have the hardware talk to the software and that. And so long story short, we built, a fully automated facility. So you didn't need to have anybody on staff. People, they'd either book online through the website, and that would go through the booking software, or you'd use the call center to call in. And again, I didn't have to be the one answering the phone. They were trained on the software and knew how to do all the reservations. And then the system, the beautiful part about the smart entry system was that if somebody was late, they didn't pay their bill, well, the system would automatically lock them out.
Interesting.
They could just, so they'd get up there. Oh, my app won't let me in. Okay, well then I'll just, go online, pay my bill. Boom, instant access reinstated. Where traditionally people are going down, they're overlocking the unit. So you'd have to send a staff person down there, put a lock on. Oh, they went on, paid their bill. Okay, come drive down, take the lock back off. And
they're trying to call somebody in service. Maybe they don't get an answer. They're frustrated because they're outside the facility. And like, you just looked at the pain points and you're like, where can I take out the human error and inefficiencies and put in some systems for leverage, right? And also from like an HR perspective, finding reliable people is difficult. And I'm like, well, if we can't find reliable people, we'll just have the robots do it. And then AI comes out and you're like, well, now we're in a different world altogether, right? So
I love AI. We could spend an hour just talking about AI and all the uses for that too. But yeah, so anyways, and at the time I didn't realize, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And, I thought, well, there must be other people doing this. Like, I didn't realize I'd done anything novel. And about a year and a half into it, I went to my first self-storage convention and, started chatting with some people about my operations. They're like, you're doing what? How does that work? And I'm like, okay, I guess this is something unique. I guess I'm onto something here. And so, yeah, long story short, I've consulted on some other developments, been directly behind some other developments using this business model, call it a smart storage platform. And so, the model's been proven out. And so now, yeah, the new focus is on bringing this into Eastern Canada now. We've made it work in one of the most expensive markets in Canada, which is, the Okanagan. That's actually kind of a funny story too. I don't want to take up all the airtime here if you've got some other things you wanted to go into. So, but yeah, so originally my thought was, okay, well, I'm going to license this business model, right? Like, 50 grand and you can come to me, I'll do all your pro formas, site designs, construction management, all that, and get you a facility set up and then, do it that way. And I was at this investor meetup, this realtor investor meetup thing in Kelowna for a project called Collison Rise. And I ended up meeting a mutual friend of ours, Aaron Rook. And at the time he had a partner, Ryan McInerney. And so met up with those guys and we started chatting and they kind of heard about the self-storage thing. They loved it, unique. And, they were kind of, they wanted into the industry. They'd heard all the benefits of self-storage and why it was so great. And they're like, oh, like we got to talk. And so told them kind of what my model was and I'm looking for people. And they're like, we'll find you people that want to do this. So literally within 3 days of meeting those boys, like aggressive, like I loved it. And 3 days of meeting them, they've got me on the call with the CEO of a big company out in London. So yeah, I'm interested here. Do up a pro forma for me on this site. And so I started going through and doing all the numbers. And I got to the land costs and I was like, well, this doesn't look right. And so end up calling them up. I'm like, hey, I think you're missing a zero. I'm like, What are you talking about? They're like, no, that's just what land costs. And I went, you got to be kidding me. Like I'm from BC, right? It's mountains and lakes. Like try and find a flat level developable piece of industrial zoned land.
Sure.
Like we're literally $1.5–2 million an acre for anything that looks anything like that out here, right? And out there, I'm hearing 300 to 500,000. I'm like, this is blowing my mind. And the other thing was that the rental rates were higher.
Sure.
And I'm like, wow, this is incredible, because as a developer, you want that delta between the land cost and the rental rates, right? The value of your facility is predicated on the cash flow, your net operating income. And so nobody cares what you paid for the dirt. They just care about what it cash flows. And so as soon as I saw that, I went, well, this is crazy. Like we're not licensing this anymore. We got to figure out a plan to do this for ourselves. And that's kind of ultimately how the business shifted and how I got into where I am today. And ultimately how we ended up meeting.
Well,
yeah.
100%. I think like there is a link to me between the hospitality, the beach resort, and what you're doing now from the standpoint of the market's always shifting, right? And there's always people looking for opportunities, and the ones that win are the ones that obviously take a certain amount of risk, but in my mind, calculated risk, and are trying to solve the problems that they feel exist in the industry. And I'll give you an example. On the real estate investing side, everybody wanted to add value to the homes that they had, maybe turn them into income producing properties. And then they wanted to get into multifamily. Then they wanted to buy apartment buildings. Then they wanted to get into land development. And then they wanted to get into private lending. And it's like the puck is always moving, right? And I think storage became popular a couple of years ago, when the markets shifted and people were having problems with the Residential Tenancies Act in Ontario and saying, listen, I don't want to get calls from tenants. Like you didn't want to deal with the drunks. People just didn't want to deal with tenants unless that was their business. And if that's your niche, you could probably have a very effective business model dealing with that. And some people make an absolute killing there, but storage was always very unique. But then you get into, again, zoning could be an issue because municipalities move very slow. You spend time in government, you know how that can work sometimes. You start looking at land costs in BC. And then what I find is through all the jobs we have in life, we meet people, right? And we do the jobs that we have and we make money doing it. Whether it was the bars or the beach resort, I'm sure you made good money doing the work that you did, but you traded time for money.
Yeah.
We become wealthy through the relationships that we make in the work that we do that lead to bigger opportunities where, the people you've mentioned, I've known for a decade plus. I've done a lot of work with them in a lot of different capacities, and there's synergies, and they are always looking around corners. So I think what I find fascinating is the speed at which you almost start looking at these things like you're taking apart an engine, wondering about, okay, well, this is how the industry operates. Well, that doesn't seem great. Like what other solutions in other industries exist that I can import into this? And some of our offline conversations around, again, AI and the future of what this looks like, coupled with something else very interesting that you're doing, effective branding and marketing. And I think that probably sets you apart. Scaling back to BC, when you filled those first facilities in 45 days, was it marketing and branding that was a piece of that? Was it the whole thing? Like, I guess I was curious to loop back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination. And yeah, certainly now I see the connection that you were trying to make with storage and that. And I can see where you're going. But yeah, absolutely. The marketing background, the branding background, it was a big part of it. So, as soon as we knew we were breaking ground, that's when you start the campaign. That's when you start building hype around it and excitement around it and coming soon and getting the wait list in place. You want to be oversubscribed before you even open your doors, right? And that was a big part of it for us. So like when we opened, I think within the first week, we had almost 30 rentals directly off of a wait list that was in place before.
Wow.
And that's pretty incredible in self-storage, because self-storage is usually one of those things that like you need it when you need it. And so it's actually hard to build a wait list months in advance and have those people still be there. But we managed to pull it off, and location plays a part, as it always does in real estate. Location. And we analyzed the town and decided this would be a great location because we were the only ones on the south end of town in this southwestern corner, and it set us apart from the other facility. And so there's a lot of advantages that we had from the site. But yeah, effective branding, marketing, getting it out there. Luckily I was able to tap into my old network of through the promotions. Like I think I've got 3,500 people on my Facebook page, for example. I built up a big reputation in town from between the bar stuff and then the council stuff and the big project on the south end. So that notoriety certainly helped. I would say that. But yeah,
I think how you treat people too, like over the years, if Max picks up the call and, picks up your phone and you send a text message, you make a phone call, there's something that comes with the effort you've put into the things that you've done. I also don't think you're ever going to retire. Like, you remind me of some people that I know that are in their 80s and 90s working on bigger, more complex problems and doing different things. And I think it's fun to see you tackling this. In terms of like Southwestern Ontario, I know one thing we're working on is site acquisition. I actually wrote down a couple notes as we were talking about some people that I'm going to reach out to that have sites that I think that could be a good fit for this, that are a little bit out of the box in terms of the typical storage facility model, but they've got the visibility, they've got the location. And I also think if you find partners in towns that are hyped about building out a new concept, I think that that's going to help build out the next sites and the next concepts, right? Because word of these things tend to get around. The other thing I was going to ask you is, like, what would stop somebody else from jumping in and doing this? I think obviously your knowledge, the first to market competitiveness, and the ability to just do it better, I think you're going to execute and you're going to dominate. But like, where does that piece of Max's brain put some guardrails around protecting what you're doing?
Yeah, I've never been afraid of competition. For one, a rising tide lifts all ships. So, back to the bar days, like I used to go to all my competitors and be like, hey, I'm going to organize an event. I'm going to bring 300 people through everybody's bars on buses. And they're like, why would you bring us business? It's like, well, because if we can create an entire scene here, it's helping everybody, right?
Wins. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've consulted on multiple projects related to this business model. I will freely give information to whoever wants to know about it. I believe in sharing information. One of the things that's really impressed me about the self-storage industry in particular is just once I cracked the nut and got into it and started meeting people, the amount of information and people willing to just share their insights, their knowledge, and their experience with me was incredible. So if there's anything I can do to give that back to anybody else with what I've learned along my journey, I'm all for it, right? Like I'm where I'm at today because of the people that were willing to share with me, and so I'm going to freely do so with anybody else that wants to. And I mean, when you look at Canada, self-storage in Canada, one thing that you'll find is we are drastically underserved. And like, as rapid as I can build these things, 3 to 6 month development timelines and
the
whatever
absorption
else,
rate, you're never going to satisfy it.
I could never. I could build my entire career and still there would be a massive shortage of self-storage across Canada. We're at 2.5 square feet per capita roughly versus the US at 9 square feet, but our usage numbers are catching up, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you look at that and you look at what's happening in Canada in particular, so our business model, obviously, a bunch of these modular units on a site is not going to work in downtown Toronto. I'm not competing for Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, all those markets, right? That's not what our model is. We're looking at secondary, tertiary markets. We want the hub and spoke business model. We get the one hub city and then all the satellite communities around it, and we get operational efficiency through that. So those are the markets that really work for our business model. But if you look at how development's happening in Canada right now, it's these mega funds that are occurring in the big cities. So, one of my strategic advisors, like, they're raising, I think it's around a $500 million fund and a $200 million fund. Like, it's just massive how much money. And the thing is that you've got people that are willing to fund it. And, they're one of many companies that are out and they're all fighting over these primary markets because there's so much money being thrown at it. Sure. We talked earlier about how this industry was kind of on the back burner and then it kind of came into the light. Really what it was the last 2 economic downturns. So we had 2008 and then we had, and that was the first time that there was enough data on all the facilities that everybody realized, like, self-storage outperformed every other asset class, period, full stop, end of sentence, through those 2 economic downturns. So people realize, like, oh, wow, like, this is not correlated to everything else that's struggling right now. Like, this is a non-correlated asset. We can make an investment into something that's going to boom when other businesses are struggling, when real estate asset classes are struggling. And so what that drove was a tremendous amount of institutional interest and investment into self-storage. Yeah. And that's when we started seeing, like, literally billions upon billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions, most likely.
I saw influencers going into the self-storage space too. Like, people that I knew were multifamily people that had built their portfolios, sell everything and get into storage at that point in time.
Well, I mean, it's incredible. So, like, the analogy I always use, and if you follow me anywhere, you'll probably hear me saying this more than once, but if you had $2 million to invest, you could buy You get into multifamily, you could probably buy a fourplex, right? Or build a fourplex. You've got 4 tenants, you've got 4 doors, right? One person moves out, you just lost 25% of your revenue overnight. Well, if you get into self-storage, a couple $1 million can buy you a couple hundred doors. One person moves out, that's 50 basis points. It doesn't even move the needle, right? Like that's, you know, that's why we're such a stable industry. Nobody, you know, out of hundreds of tenants, you can imagine how many different circumstances these are being used for, right? We've got commercial tenants, we've got people that are in between houses, we've got people that have downsized for whatever reason. Like there's all different reasons why somebody might need storage. And when you've got that diverse of a tenant base, you're never going to have circumstances where you have just mass move out. Like for me to lose 25% of revenue in that example, I'd have to have 50 people move out overnight. You're never going to have it happen, right? And so that's what really creates stability. And then, you know, when we're talking about those economic downturns, you know, it sounds a little bit morbid, but we're driven by what's called the 4 Ds: death, divorce, downsizing, and dislocation. These are, you know, terrible life events, but you can imagine that they're all driven substantially during times of economic instability, right? And so that's typically when we see demand drivers for self-storage. So in COVID was actually the peak of self-storage profitability. And once the big money players realize this, like, you know, office is going out of business, people are losing their shirts on everything, and then self-storage is having banner years. Let's face it, when times are good, people buy more stuff. When times are bad and people need to downsize, they need somewhere to put their stuff, right? And
Pretty simple.
These things are, you know, they're valuable to people. They may not make sense to you or I, but there's emotional attachments. I mean, that's how we are as humans, right?
I was thinking about a storage facility the other day for our media room and some stuff I have back at home. But I mean, the first principles make a ton of sense. And there's 2 things I want to point out before I land the plane on this. You know, one, your answer to the question about competition was my favorite ever, because it's a signal to somebody who's successful that, you know, the more secrets they give away, the more they're going to go find more secrets. Like I kind of try to do the same thing in my industry. People get very confused when I invite competitors to my masterminds. Like I introduce them to developers, my own clients. And I'm like, you can try and poach my team and take my clients. I'm confident that I'm going to go out there and try and be good enough that the right ones will stay and the wrong ones will leave. I don't care. I also think the second piece is, dude, you are passionate. Like when we talk about storage, I smile because like I am like the Switzerland where I have clients that do single family, that do commercial, that do retail, office, and storage, and all of them are very passionate in different ways. I definitely think that you are looking around corners. I think you have one of the most unique asset classes. I just booked a venue to get you here in person, which I'm very excited about.
Looking forward to that.
If you're watching this podcast and you want to join us May 22nd, send me a DM. It's going to be an awesome event. If you're watching the replay, then send me a DM anyways, and I can make a connection with Max. I'm definitely pumped to do this in person. I think if you can bring this energy across the country doing this virtually with me, doing it in person is going to be even better, Max. So any last words that you want to leave for the audience before we sign off?
Look, you know, we're looking forward. You know, if you take a look at the macro picture of what's happening across North America right now, there's a very real risk of a recession on the horizon here. And this isn't to be doom and gloom, but you know, we've seen the instability in the stock markets. We've seen the instability in different real estate asset classes, and you might be looking for what is the right place to put your money. Take a look at self-storage. You know, I'm biased. You know, I'll say it with a grain of salt. I am biased, but we are, you know, we're not recession-proof. Nothing's recession-proof, but we're recession-resistant. You know, and we talked about some of the reasons why. You know, if you are looking for somewhere safe and stable to make investments in this kind of economic uncertainty, I encourage you to look at it, whether that's with us or whether that's with, you know, one of the other many great operators or funds that are out there that are doing this kind of thing. Find the one that's right for you, whether that's, you know, a buy and a value add, or, you know, if you want that existing cash flow, or if it's a development play, or whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you, whatever fits your portfolio, diversify into storage, get some stability on your portfolio. You want to balance it, right? Diversification. A lot of people think of diversification as, you know, oh, I've invested in this multifamily developer here and a completely different one on this side of the country. Well, guess what? You're all still in multifamily. If that whole industry or that whole asset class takes a downturn, you're not really truly diversified, right? So, you know, look at your portfolio, make sure you're diversified across multiple asset classes. Sure. And I encourage everybody to take a look at self-storage, because it truly is, you know, the one that's non-correlated to probably a lot of what people have in their asset class or in their portfolio. So.
Well, I love seeing people who are passionate about their industry. Everybody can connect with Max Picton. When you're looking at these opportunities, I would advise you do your due diligence, start looking through their back end, look at their strategies, and look at their backgrounds. Thanks again, Max, for being on the podcast, and looking forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Justin. That was great.